Welcome to Public Safety Talk Radio, the podcast for all of our heroes in public safety, including law enforcement professionals, firefighters, EMTs, corrections officers, healthcare workers, and more. This show is produced by the POCUA and is founded upon its Soundness initiative. This episode is sponsored by Police Mortgage. Police Mortgage is a full-service mortgage company dedicated to serving police officers and first responders. Founded in 2008, Police Mortgage offers a variety of mortgage products tailored to meet the needs of those who serve and protect. Police Mortgage, for first responders who are second to none. Hi, I'm Ken Bader, your host for Public Safety Talk Radio, and I have a great conversation in store. I knew it was going to be great anyway, and then in some of the pregame, found out it's even going to be better because this is a great new business, a great new podcast, and just a great guest. His name is Frank Magaha, and he is the founder of Armagon Consulting and Training, and they are a team of dedicated law enforcement professionals committed to helping police applicants navigate and succeed in the hiring process. Their goal is to cultivate future law enforcement officers who will serve their communities with honor and integrity, and we know we need more of those. Frank, welcome to the show.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. Like I said, I already enjoyed talking to you, and we had to press the record button so we didn't get all the good stuff, out of the way before I pressed record, which happens sometimes.
So I understand that completely. How are you doing today, Ken?
Good. And I know you're doing great too. So I love the entrepreneurial journey. As much as I love law enforcement, I love new businesses just as much. And I love to hear about the motivation for starting something, the passion for starting something. So tell us a little bit about the motivation to start up and run Armagon Consulting.
Yeah, so I've always had kind of that entrepreneurial spirit as well. After I got out of the Navy, I started my law enforcement career with the National Park Service as a backcountry law enforcement ranger. Went up to DC and wound up working with another agency up there. And while I was up there, my career exploded. I can't take too much credit for it. I had really good mentors that guided me through it and kind of helped me accelerate that. So in a few short years, I was able to just kind of grow. I mean, managed to get a lot of different trainings. I managed to get a lot of instructorships. Managed to train a bunch of different organizations. And one day I saw what they were charging those organizations to have me train them. Like, that's a lot more than my salary. Yeah. But ultimately, I decided to lateral back down to North Carolina, where I wanted to kind of slow down my law enforcement. So I lateraled to another federal agency back down here in North Carolina. And while I was there, it wasn't quite the same feel. At that point in time, I knew I wanted to keep training individually because I really liked it. So I had opened up Armagon, and we were kind of doing just a lack of entrepreneurial knowledge and business knowledge. I just kind of shotgun all my knowledge out there, whether it was tactical medicine training, firearms, law enforcement, professional standards, anything and everything that I could really do. Ultimately, I was looking at how the one agency I was working with was operating. I'm like, not my cup of tea, really. I just couldn't get behind a few things. So I said, now's a good time to step away. I had some injuries that were catching up to me from the military, and I didn't feel it was probably the hardest decision professionally I had to make, where to actually tell myself, as young as I was, is it best for me to be out in the field anymore? I didn't want to have to use a tool or something on my duty belt because, my shoulder would dislocate if I got into a scuffle and then I couldn't protect myself. So it was a real hard decision to make. But while I was up in DC, I really loved training. That's not the type of guy I was. I was always about, operations and everything, but I just really fell in love with training. I started the company back in 2020, like I said, as we
when COVID started. That's a perfect time.
Yeah, I did. I literally started June of 2020. So, hopefully I'm one of those stories in 100 years, and when someone else runs the company and I don't, and they say, yeah, we started during a pandemic, or you hear people that started their companies during the Great Depression or something like that. Hopefully we're that story. But no, so we started in 2020. We were doing a bit of everything. Trying to find our niche. Once again, had some really good mentors that said, "Hey, why don't you just go over to social media for a little bit?" And I'm like, "Oh, I don't know. I don't know if that's my cup of tea.
Hmm.
I'm not really all that great in front of a camera. And if you watch my earlier stuff, you will agree with me."
I will now. I didn't have a need to, but now, maybe when I edit
it
this,
it
let's
you
see how far Frank has come.
Yes, you and hopefully I can still get better because I still don't think I'm great now. But the aspect of it is I tried it. I listened to a mentor. They said put out all your knowledge out on social media.
Hmm.
I did. I did a little bit more research, put out everything, and then they said listen to what the market tells you. I did, and a couple things started popping off. One of the things I put out there was how to become a police officer. And
Hmm.
I mean, for me at the point in time where I had a small YouTube channel with maybe 30 subscribers at the time, I had 10,000 views, which is astronomical on a video in like a month or so on how to
Yeah, it's
become a
awesome.
police officer. I was like, okay, that's interesting. And then that same mentor said, well, how many times do you get asked this question? I'm like, oh man, once everyone finds out I've been in law enforcement or I'm a cop, it's almost the number one question they get asked. They're like, that's your niche.
Yeah.
So I didn't really think it would go specifically into law enforcement candidate prep, but the more I dove into it, I had all my own experience of going through the hiring process, and I'm adamant to say that it's the hardest hiring process, in my personal
Hmm.
opinion, in the world to go through. But I had my own personal experiences and hurdles going through it, and then I started listening to all these other candidates, and then having an inside look into it as helping one of my agencies in the past with with hiring and interviewing and backgrounds and things like that. It just people were making mistakes that they didn't have to make and getting themselves
Yeah.
disqualified or permanently disqualified, and we've just been truly blessed. We've carved out such a nice niche for us that it's been uh, a blessing on both ends. It's been a blessing professionally to grow in this way and to continue to grow, and then even financially as a business owner and an entrepreneur, we've just it's nice to be able to have this to take care of my family and give me more time with my family, which was the ultimate goal when I started the business.
Yeah, kudos on a lot of things there. I mean, for context, I started Bader Training and Consulting on 9/11/01. That was a great day to start a business.
Yep.
And I'm still doing it. In 2020, ironically, in February of that year, I decided to get sober. And so that's a great time to get sober when you got nothing to do except sitting around the house surrounded by alcohol. So, and I did both of those. So, so starting a business in 2020 is probably good luck for you. I also give you a lot of credit for being very conscious about your abilities on the job. I've never been a first responder, so I can only speak about this vicariously, but I've had a number of guests that I respect on this show that do physical training and things of that nature that have been first responders. And especially in the firefighter world, I've heard more than one person say very, very harshly, if you're overweight, if you're out of shape, if you're not at the top physical fitness level for your job, you're not just putting yourself in harm's way, you're putting your whole team in harm's way. So as hard as that decision was for you, I applaud you for what looks like making the right one. And I think that the world is a better place, not because you're not doing that job, but you're doing just as an important job of helping these young girls and guys become great cops in the near future.
I appreciate it. Yeah, as I said, it was definitely a hard decision. The more I was doing our 40-hour refreshers and stuff like that, I was noticing those injuries kind of getting in the way just when you're doing training and stuff like that. And I was saying it was one of those, man, I know it's gonna happen. It's because I was always gung ho getting out there, make the traffic stop, get in a foot pursuit. One of the big ticket things was I had to have an ankle surgery
Mm.
from an injury that I sustained in the military, and it was years later I had it, and they found some foreign objects in there and had to clean up or something like that, and
Yeah.
um, nothing. I was just like, my ankle hurts. They're like, let's do X-rays and MRIs, and they did it,
Mhm.
and they're like, hey, there's some stuff in there that's got to come out. And I was like, I didn't know anything about it, but all right.
Yeah.
And and so I was on light duty for a little bit, but I didn't want to stay on light duty. And the next thing you know, I came off light duty and I wasn't quite prepared. And me and my partner got into a foot pursuit of a couple different suspects, multiple suspects. And I used to be fairly quick. Now I keep getting older and slower
Hmm.
and weaker, and the kids keep getting younger, stronger, and faster. But ultimately, I was always fairly pretty quick. You know, my
Hmm.
fastest mile and a half time was an 8:13 on testing, and so this individual partner of mine, really good squared away officer, a little bit on the heavier side just for running, but super fit.
Hmm.
Needless to say, he's never beat me in a race. He did that day, and it scared
Yeah.
the life out of me.
Hmm.
We were in that foot pursuit, multiple different suspects, and there was a construction site, so it had the fence with the kind of what is
With
it, the
that,
wrapping
with that,
around it where you can't
yeah,
see
that
through
like
it.
orange wrapping crap.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I couldn't keep up with him because of that surgery because I came back off of light duty too soon and I couldn't catch him. And for about 8 seconds, he dipped around that corner with those suspects, and it was the worst 8 seconds of my life as a law
Yeah.
enforcement officer because I had no idea what was happening to him.
Yeah, and that's 8 seconds. I again know from vicarious experience and talking to a lot of you folks is a long time
Oh yeah.
to not have backup.
Yeah, I was so that was one of the first real step backs where I said,
Yeah.
hey, you know, there's a reason why, you know, they make us retire a little bit earlier than most jobs, and that's because the physical requirements are extensive.
Are you looking for a podcast to answer some financial questions? Well, then check out the Mortgage Beat podcast, brought to you by Police Mortgage, for first responders who are second to none. Mortgage Beat gives insight into the home loan process specifically for police officers, firefighters, and other public safety professionals. The podcast is hosted by Police Mortgage CEO John Aritos, who has decades of experience in the mortgage industry. Check out Mortgage Beat on Spotify today. Let's get into your training in the requirements. I just, I think back, I wound up, getting a degree and going into business, but for a very, very, very short time in my life, in my very early 20s, I thought about being a firefighter. And I went through, probably about 8 to 10 tests in the Chicagoland area where I grew up. And physically, I did really, really well. I did. I was in shape. I was actually in shape then. This is more than 30 years ago. But I was afraid of heights. I'm still really proud that I didn't flunk the ladder test. But I was able to run. I was always one of the fastest ones in the run time. I was able to lift, well enough where I was always passing the bench press test and everything and so on and so forth. But where, I always failed was the written test because I was never good at physics or, or spatial relations. Hey, if these five pulleys all go this way, which one does this one move? Really? And the most important thing is I never passed the interview phase with the city
Mhm.
council or anything.
It's a hard phase to pass.
I was way too arrogant, didn't know, exactly why I was doing it and so forth. So, to finish my ramble, that's why, having a mentor like you to kind of go through, it's like, hey, yeah, that's great that you can run fast and you can, slap cuffs on people, but there's more to the job than this. So, kind of dig into, how important it is, for an individual that's even thinking about a career in law enforcement, that they come talk to somebody, you specifically, or at least somebody like you out there.
Yeah, I think having a mentor in any aspect of life, whether it's, you know, teaching or law enforcement or any aspect is amazing. You know, when you get to high level rankings in law enforcement, you know, say you become a chief or a sheriff, you know, you can go to the FBI Academy for leadership, right? And they'll
Hmm.
put you through a whole FBI Academy for those top, you know, 0.5% of department leaders that run departments across the nation or, you know, even in other countries. And they go there. And if we're going to do that for our top leadership, I think anyone that has any type of vertical structure organization that they work in, they know that that knowledge and experience doesn't always come all the way down unless you have a really good, sometimes it stops at middle management
Hmm.
and those aspects. Well, then we're getting mad at our officers that are on the street saying, "Why don't you have as much knowledge? Why'd you make this mistake?" Well, because I don't have all the knowledge and experience that my chief has or my sheriff has, because that didn't trickle all the way down.
Right.
So when I thought about this, I said, well, what if we flip this around? What if we started passing that knowledge around now? And a lot of what I work with law enforcement candidates is I take the actual courtroom training that you would get, the articulation and all that
Hmm.
aspect, and I give it to them now so that they can properly convey themselves, not only going through the hiring process, but in the academy and succeed throughout the entire aspect. And that's kind of been one of the biggest motivators for me to want to get into this role to kind of mentor. As I said before, I've had mentors my entire life, to the point where individuals of mine, I didn't even realize they were mentors at the time. And the
Hmm.
only reason I've even had any of the success I've had is because I was smart enough to at least listen to them 50% of the time, which means I was dumb
which
50%.
is which is probably 40% more than most people
Yeah,
listen.
and that's really what it was. I mean, I just think about, I'm like, imagine if I listened to them completely, and not to say that you just need to listen to someone blindly, but if I really took all that advice, I believe someone that you can learn from what not to do by someone. See
Hmm.
someone do something wrong. Knowledge is in learning. Don't follow that mistake if you've already
Yep.
seen that mistake happen, right? So it all started in my first law enforcement position. I was the backcountry ranger for the Smoky Mountain National Park. And before I was released off FTO to go patrol the backcountry, I was doing front country road patrol, which is just patrol traffic stops. A park runs like its own little city.
Hmm.
And my first traffic stop and first arrest I ever was a part of was another law enforcement officer. I stopped another cop for
Wow.
a DUI with their
Hmm.
sober wife in the passenger seat and their two little girls in the back. Now I have two little girls myself now, and I look back at it and I say, man, I would never put my family in that situation. And he was coming down a mountain with really windy roads, and it was obvious that he was intoxicated, and we stopped him.
Hmm.
And he was a cop, had his gun on him, had his badge on him, everything, completely intoxicated. And I literally was frozen.
Yeah.
My supervisor shows up and I said, "Sir, what do you do with this? Because I promise you the academy didn't prepare me for this scenario."
Right.
And he looked at me, and thank goodness he did, because he looked at me and he said, "Frank, if this was any other person, what would you do?" I said, "They'd be arrested right now. They'd already be in cuffs." He's like, "Then that's what you do." And the
Hmm.
only professional courtesy we did is we allowed him to take his badge and his gun off, and took it. And he was wearing a badge shirt, and we took that off so he wouldn't have a badge on his chest when he went to jail, because
Yeah.
that would have been he would have been targeted pretty good for those couple days he'd have to sit in jail.
Yeah.
And yeah, that set the whole tone of my career for mentors. So it was one of those things. First arrest I was ever part of was another cop, unfortunately. Uh,
Yeah.
and and I could only imagine the failure I would have probably made that day if I didn't have a good mentor.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's quite possible, I obviously wasn't there, but it's quite possible that you saved three lives, innocent lives that day of, his wife and those kids if he continued driving down those roads. But you never know, and that's a tough position to be in.
A
Yeah,
rookie
I think
officer, I mean, fresh out of the academy.
yeah, I think even a 20-year veteran having to arrest a fellow officer for anything, I think that's probably still, a hard experience. Maybe it's a little bit more cut and dry, but yeah, never a good time.
Yeah. And then it was easily explainable at that point in time is how far does, professional courtesy go? And
Hmm.
it came down to there's a simple answer for it. It goes to the point where if you'd give it to any other member of the public,
Yeah,
then the way it's professional courtesy is you're just more willing to extend it to them. So if you're going to give someone else a warning for speeding, you can give a law enforcement officer a warning for speeding. If a law enforcement officer is drinking and driving and it's a mandatory arrest,
yeah.
you better cover yourself in the department.
Yeah, I've again never been a police officer, but I've worked with police officers for 25 years and call a lot of them friends. And I'll go someplace, I'll say, "Hey, I'm coming into town or whatever." And there's always been kind of a running joke. It's like, "Hey, if I get into trouble, can I give them your number?" He says, "Well, it depends." And I've gotten different versions of this. It's like if it's just like a little scrape, like, a minor fight where nobody gets hurt, or, you wind up, making not turning your turn signal on and getting a ticket, I could probably help you. But if it's a DUI or reckless driving, you're completely on your own.
Yeah,
Don't even
don't
bother to
even
call me.
mention me. Yeah,
I don't
and
know you.
that's and it's that's good. I'm glad to hear that that's the way that it's going out there. But yeah, it's to answer your original question, that's what set the tone for me for mentorship. And then
Yeah.
throughout my entire career, it's just been there for me, and it would be I'd be failing myself and others if I didn't give it back at this point.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, I could just tell in a short amount of time that I think that you're a very sound and patient mentor. So let's dig back into a little bit of the training and a little bit of today. Maybe you could speak to this, and maybe this is a completely off the wall question, but one of the things that I'm hearing, in not to get into a political discussion, but just simply the facts here in 2025, that I know a lot of the recruitments for the military have gone up. And I think that that speaks to kind of a change in attitude, a change in zeitgeist in our country. And I would hope that along with some of that other change, that there is more of an appreciation, less of a full-blown hatred towards police officers out there. At least that would be my hope. And I see a little bit of that out there. So with that, yeah, I think the question is, are you seeing more people that are qualified in their late teens, early 20s, that are actually more apt to become police officer? Are you seeing those numbers or that feeling going up at all, or am I just off base?
Yeah, so when I started this and I niched down and focused Armageddon on what it was now in 2022 is really when I niched it down into what it is. We everyone told me I was crazy. They're like, first of all, you can't run a successful business off of that. No one wants to be a cop. That's all baloney. All
Yeah,
that's baloney. I'm going to answer this in two parts. So to answer your question is, has the political climate changed? And I would like to say yes in some aspects. I hate discussing politics, especially from a
right,
professional setting. But the one aspect is, and this is anything across the board with any, I guess you're going to say any profession. You always have those diehards. You always have those people on the fence, and then you always have those just not, I don't want to say anti, but just completely against. I'll never be a law enforcement officer.
right,
I'd do it if the pay was better or if I felt they were better, better supported. All I can think about is becoming a law enforcement officer. Though there's more, but I'm locking it into those three categories for the purpose of this question. So, yes, when you have an administration that seems more supportive to law enforcement, you'll get those people on the fence that roll over a little bit, right? Maybe they'll come over and stuff like that. But and this is a very bold statement for me to make here, and I don't know if it's actually accurate. I'd,
mm,
I'd be inclined to even say we might have more data than on law enforcement recruitment after these last, or at least recent data on law enforcement recruitment after these last 2.5 years that we've been focusing on it than any other organization out there. And that's a bold statement. And I'm probably not
mm,
accurate on that. Maybe there's research groups out there that's only focusing on this, but
sure,
I'm talking with these applicants every single day. And the
right,
difference with them talking with me versus talking with these other organizations is I like to think that they're being transparent and honest with me. Right? They're telling me these are my real hurdles. This is what I'm concerned about getting over. And a misconception is that it's 18, 19, 21 year olds, 22 year olds. When I started this, I had a business consultant tell me, Frank, you're not going to be able to get a 21 or 22 year old to pay you for mentorship and for training. There's just no money in there. Maybe, yeah. But the average applicants between the age of 25 and 36.
mm,
Most people aren't 21-year-old applicants. Most of the applicants that you see are individuals that have already started a career and found that it's not rewarding.
Hmm.
They're saying, what am I doing with my life? I'm working for someone else. I'm not making any type of impact. Our oldest hire is 54 or 58, I believe, something like that. It's our oldest hire, someone we've helped get hired at this point. But
Wow. And I'm
it,
55, so that means I can still join.
yeah, I mean, it is, not every department has an age and it has an age cap to it. So it's one of those aspects where it's just a misconception about what people are really looking for, and I hope that there's some recruitment firms out there or departments that hear this. People are still motivated by the I want to make a difference,
Hmm.
and a lot of people say, "Oh, it's the money, it's the." We make pretty good money as a law
Hmm.
enforcement. I'm not. I mean, depending on where you are, yes, some departments are severely underpaid, right?
Hmm.
But we make pretty good money. If you add in our incentives and our differential pays and our overtime pay and stuff along those lines, plus the health benefits and law enforcement. I mean, even the military doesn't even have a retirement anymore. They have a 401k, right? They have their
Hmm.
TSP, their 401k, but they don't have a pension anymore. Law enforcement's
Yeah.
one of the last government positions that have a pension. And so it's not always about the money. Yes, that can be a determining factor for those on the fence.
Hmm.
But for those that are the diehards, they're still out there. They just don't talk about it anymore because they know they're going to get beat up publicly.
Yeah.
And so that's where it is. So I am seeing more applicants come in, but I think that's only because we're growing in brand name and more people are finding us. So where we
Hmm.
started at this point to where we are now, I think those applicants have always been out there. I just didn't think that they felt there was a safe place, and I don't even like stating that. I don't feel like that.
It's a safe place,
Can't
Frank.
believe
You
that just
say
came out of
whatever
my
you
mouth.
want.
I
You
don't
want a
think that
hug?
they this is exactly it, right? But that's it. I don't think that they thought that there was a spot where they could express their interest in it without
Yeah.
getting beat up. I know people that say, Frank, I'm afraid to tell my family. They're going to disown me as soon as I
Mm,
tell them I want to become a law enforcement officer. And I tell them, hey, we have a really, kind of a three-prong feeling for picking the right departments. And then before I even tell someone they're eligible to even work with us, because we evaluate them,
hmm.
I ask them, hey, what is this to you? What are you
Yeah.
looking to get? That's the number one. And I leave it an open-ended question. And depending on their answers, whether or not I tell them they're eligible for consulting or coaching.
Yeah. No, that's great. Yeah, let's dive into that a little bit in terms of what I'll call it, probably not the words you would necessarily use, but the mentoring process is, somebody comes to you, obviously there's a almost like an interview or, hey, are you right for us? Are you right for the
Mhm.
job type of thing? And is there a process where, okay, we're going to take you through this? Is there times where you say, you know what, you're not ready. Why don't you listen to our podcast for a day?
I think the big thing is balancing, the balancing being realistic. You have to be realistic from this point. Is I'm balancing wanting to make a positive impact on life, on whether it's the United States of America, whether it's Canada. We've helped officers in Australia. We've helped officers in South Africa, right? Making that positive impact and then running a business so that we can continue doing that, right? So that's that aspect. The big thing and I'll kind of walk you through what works for us and
Sure,
hope,
please.
maybe another entrepreneur, can use it for their business or something like that. We do everything based on organic marketing, right? Which is we don't run ads. We do everything through YouTube's not really a social media outlet, it's a search engine, but we do
Hmm.
everything through YouTube. We recently jumped into two social media such as TikTok and Instagram, and we've started putting out more content. And what we do is I'll shoot videos, training videos that will help people,
Hmm.
and I'll try to deep dive as much as I can in a 15 to 20-minute video, and give them insights into the hiring process, or maybe even now we're getting into a little bit more of academy prep and things like that.
Hmm.
Just success, professional development success. Just because you're not a sworn officer yet doesn't mean you shouldn't be working on professional development.
Hmm.
So we do that, and then from there we have a couple kind of gifts, right? They're called lead magnets because they help us follow leads that will give us a
Mhm.
better idea of candidates that we may be able to help our work with. We have two that I'll normally reference, and one is, and I could actually. I've done the spiel so much. It's kind of like your opening intro. You could probably do it.
Mhm.
I could do it from heart right now, and I probably would nail it without even looking at anything. But we have two. We have our getting started workshop, which is a pre-recording of me going through every phase of the hiring process. And in that, we have some other tests. We have a written exam practice test in there, and then we have a police candidate eligibility exam that we have in there. I'll
Mhm.
circle back to that here in a little bit, but that's in one of them. And then when people do, they sign up, we get their email, and then that promotes them to a week's long worth of emails where we give, for the first couple days we give them more information, right? We just want to over deliver. We want whether they work with us or
Mhm.
not doesn't matter. I want good officers out on the street. That's our mission statement, right? And so we do that, and then the last 2 days of that are still giving them more information, but then telling them, hey, here's our online course if you're looking for a self-paced, more in depth, and we have a lot of downloadables, more video trainings in there that you won't find on YouTube and other things,
Mhm.
like just more in depth stuff. And then the other one we have is a coaching call. Now, originally these coaching calls were free and they still are with my other instructors. But as we've grown, there's a lot of people trying to sign up with calls specifically with me. So now with me, I think it's a $97 fee is what the team has it up to for an
Mhm.
initial coaching call with me. And I'm still fairly booked up with it.
Mhm.
And and then that initial call is coaching. And I make this known to all my instructors. This is not a sales call, right? It's not a sales. They come in, we get a basic, they leave us a little blurb. Hey, please give us any information that help. We run them through a strict intro. Hey, tell me about yourself. How old are you? Where do you live? So we know what state you're applying in because it helps us. Each state's a little different. We
Right.
find out a little bit about their experience, and then we find out if they've applied to any departments. And then big thing is if they've been disqualified or failed any departments. And then
Mhm.
from there, we open it up. Any and all questions. Ask away. We'll do our best to answer based on the knowledge we have. And then at the end, by the time we get to that point, we have a good feeling whether or not they're a strong candidate, but we'll run them through what's called eligibility question, right? Candidate eligibility. And this allows us to tell them at the end, hey, we feel you'd be a good fit for law enforcement or we feel you wouldn't. Doesn't mean you're not eligible. It just means you might have
Right.
hurdles to get through. More
Mhm.
hurdles you have, the harder it is to become a law enforcement officer. And we'll do that. And then at the end, we'll express it to them. And each of my instructors, they all run independently. They have full autonomy to decide whether or not they'll work with someone. And
Mhm.
so at the end, they can say, hey, you're eligible to work with me if you want. I can tell you about our coaching, our consulting programs. If you're interested, great. If not, keep in touch. We want to know how your process is going.
Mhm.
And that's pretty much it. I've when I got out, when I was telling you before when we started, I started when I got out, I went into an EMT. When I got out of the military, I went into an EMT program, and that really helped me get hired in my first. Being willing to self-invest in yourself, and I don't care if that's monetarily, time, training, whatever, that's what separates success, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So you could go through and watch all our free content and message
Mhm.
me on YouTube and every other thing, and I'll do my best to answer every question I can for you. But those that want more and that are really willing to invest in themselves, we're here for them if they want to take it to the next step.
Yeah. No,
That's the way.
that's
That's the way it pretty much works.
no, that's awesome. I love that on so many levels. I mean, first from the entrepreneurship level is, I was telling somebody this who's 25 years old just last week who was, trying to figure out, what his next step was. And, I says, well, I don't have kids. I'm not going to talk to you like a parent or a relative. I said, I'll talk to you like I do with all my clients is, first off, what do you really enjoy doing?
Mhm.
Yeah. What are you really good at? And if those two intersect, let's look at the third circle and see, can we make money at it? Yeah, because there's nothing wrong with making money at it if you're providing value on the other side. So it seems like you're doing that. Yeah, a couple of questions that popped up when you answered my last one was one, how many instructors do you have at Armageddon Consulting? And I know I'm probably continue to screw up the
Yeah,
pronunciation
that's
of
all right.
that.
That's all right. No, you're, you're,
But
you're
how
hitting it.
how many instructors do you have? And I think a more in-depth question is, as you talk to people throughout the nation, do you find that there are some states or cities that are really kind of out there with some of their
Yeah.
stuff, like whether it's my hometown of Chicago or God forbid, California. I mean, I know business people that won't do business out here in this state, and I can't blame them. But yeah, do you see some nuances out there? It's like, well, if you're gonna be in this city, this is what you're gonna need to do, and it's gonna be more than say going to like Raleigh, North Carolina or something.
Yeah, a lot of it. Oh, you're gonna get me in trouble.
I, you know what, you know what is with all my guests, you have the right to say, yeah, I'm just gonna
No, no, it's all
sidestep
right.
that
I'm just
one.
if I get contacted by any heads of any state police or governors, you're like, we're already having a hard enough time recruiting. You're making it harder for us. Um, I sometimes there's specific departments that I find that are
Yeah.
really hard. Other times there is specific states,
Hmm.
or you get or the states have additional screening. Like let's take Chicago, for instance, if you don't
Yeah.
mind us hitting your home.
Yeah.
They have, their the board commission. So you got to do an extra interview. And then you got to do that
Hmm.
interview with it's not just law enforcement officers. So you have civilians. And now you're
Hmm.
getting into a political climate because you got civilians
Right.
that have never been a law enforcement officer, and you got law enforcement that having issues and contentions with a political environment, and it makes it harder because you get a candidate in there and you just have sometimes you have political biases, sometimes you have personal biases, things like that. I love law enforcement. I as a kid I always knew I wanted to get into law enforcement, and I just stuck with it. And yet there's sometimes I run into law enforcement officers where I'm like, what are you doing, man? You're the worst representation of
Yeah.
so what I'm getting at is I try to remain neutral and say there's a balance on both sides before I wind up throwing out here. But Chicago's a really hard one just because they have that
Mhm.
extra commission uh
Yeah.
interview that they have to do, or commission review that they have to do. So that can sometimes be a hard one. And everyone's like, oh, apply to these really big agencies because they'll get you, like you'll be able to get in because they're down 1,000 officers or
Yeah.
whatnot. And that is true on some contexts, but then not true on the other. Because
Yeah.
they're a larger department, they have a streamlined process. So either you fit the mold or
Right.
they just get rid of you.
Hmm.
So even a candidate that would be a really good candidate, but maybe has a different background. Maybe they have hey, you've had to have 3 years of work experience prior to working, but you had a candidate that was working as a security manager for 6 years and then stopped to go back to school for 2 years to get their associates to have 60 credits so that they could apply to Chicago.
Hmm.
And then they say, no, you haven't worked in you haven't had employment in the last 3 years, so you're ineligible. And now you just kick because he didn't fit the mold. And the larger departments tend to go by that checklist, that real quick
Hmm.
checklist, where you're more of a number than an individual. And there's nothing wrong with that. They're a large department, they have to do it some way, but you'll lose good candidates that way.
Yeah.
Other departments, you'll run into it where they'll say where they really deep dive into a select individual because they're smaller, and they'll if they find any little thing that's outside the norm or any little thing that would be, you know, inconsistent, or that they don't even feel like, hey, you're going to mesh with our environment here, they won't select you. But then
Right.
Chicago would take you because you fit that, you check all the boxes. So it's a little bit different anywhere you go. And then I swear, if I get a call from the Florida governor, I'm blaming you on this one. You go to Florida, and Florida is one of
Ron DeSantis, are you on?
the so So you go to Florida, and Florida was one of the states. I think they're running into a little bit more issues now, but Florida was one of the states that wasn't feeling the crisis as bad,
Hmm.
especially after the mass exodus in during COVID and during the 2020 when we've had that real mass exodus of retirements and resignations.
Yeah.
Florida is one of the few states that allowed out of state laterals.
Hmm.
Right? A couple other states are doing it now. So what happens is you could be an officer in California or Georgia, and don't hold me to any. They might have had certain state restrictions
Sure.
on it, but you could be an officer in another state and then come work at this state and just do a bridge course. It's 6, 8 weeks, whatever. So you wouldn't have to do a full academy.
Hmm.
Just come in and you carry over your experience, and you'd get hired as a lateral with better incentives, better bonuses, and you're not starting from the ground up. Well, that's great when one state does that, right? But if you're a new recruit in Florida and you have no experience, they almost mandate that you self-sponsor through the academy, which
Mm-hmm.
means you can't work. I mean, you can. So there's these new academies where you can go to school at night or weekends and stuff. It takes longer, from 6 month academy to a 9 month academy now.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to self-sponsor, so you have to come out of pocket. And now they're even making you come out of pocket for your own ammo too. Some, not
Yeah.
all, but some. So you're coming out of pocket for your uniform. You're coming out of pocket for the academy. You're coming out of pocket for ammo, and then you're not even guaranteed a job afterwards.
Yeah.
But now you're just a new recruit with your post cert or your academy cert, so you're more marketable. And if I was going to tier law enforcement applicants, you'd have your in-state laterals, people who are already certified in that state, lateraling from one agency to another. Then you have your out-of-state laterals, if that state allows it. Then you have your academy graduates already, but never been a law enforcement officer. Then you have your new recruits that are looking for what we call sponsorship. So you have self-sponsored and you have sponsored. And what it is a typical hiring process that you'd see. I apply, I go through the process, they hire me, and my title is police officer or police recruit, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
going through the academy and I'm paid as a government employee. Maybe I might have a little bit lower salary till I graduate the academy or FTO. But a place like Florida as a new recruit, there's been times where I've recommended to people, hey, if you can't self-sponsor, we might want to look at, and you're willing to relocate, we might look at applying to a different state. And then if you want to come
Mm-hmm.
back to Florida later, you can come back to Florida as a lateral because that's how hard it could be. And there's very few departments in Florida that actually accept or do sponsored recruit billets.
Yeah, it amazes me, and it started out when my actual, I believe one of my first clients for beta training consulting was Chicago Patrolmen's Federal Credit Union, and it amazed me then because this was 25 years ago that it's like, yeah, they've got to buy their own firearm, yeah, they've got to buy their own uniform, and some of these people are, some of these guys and gals are just out of, community college, we're working at, Jewel food store and just we're smart enough and strong enough and good enough to become a police officer and now they're already in debt.
One of my longest members, and he was a younger individual and kept kind of getting in his own way, overthinking. And then we got him
Hmm.
hired. And next thing you know, he's getting picked up with a sheriff's department, and reaches out to me and he says, "Hey Frank, what gun should I purchase?" I'm like, "What? What are we saying?" He's like, "What gun should I purchase?" It's like, "Well, normally from a law enforcement post standard,
Hmm.
we all use the same type of gun because we all have to train with the same type of gun. Because if I'm
Right.
your partner and you go down and I lose ammunition, I could grab your firearm and use that firearm, or I can render your firearm safe if I need to because I'm familiar with it. So to hear that some departments still out there, this baffled me, and I learn every single day from my members. Right, you need to always be
Mhm.
open to learning, but it baffled me where he said, "Hey, yeah," and he had to do a firearms qual before so he got his final offer, but it was contingent upon him passing a firearms qual.
Hmm.
So you have no training whatsoever, and you got to go pass a police qual. It blew my mind, and this happened a few months ago, and I was just like, "See, you never know everything. You never."
Yeah.
And I could not believe there's still departments out there that required that. And now the more I get into it, people have been coming to me and saying, "Yeah, Frank, my department does that, or my department." I'm
Oh yeah. Yeah,
blowing
it's
my mind.
one of the funniest stories, great colleague of mine and friend, founder of the Wounded Blue, Randy Sutton. He tells this story of, starting his police career as a teenager in New Jersey.
Hmm.
And he got the job, but apparently there was a law, and I may be getting this wrong, that I think you needed to be 21 in order to buy ammunition in that state. So even though he was hired as a full-time police officer, he had to take his mommy to the gun store so that she could buy him ammunition to do his job.
And you'll see laws on the books. Cannot purchase ammunition unless 21, unless you're a police officer. And I'm
Yeah,
like, what are you talking about here? The old what they changed the smoking, consuming of tobacco to 21.
yeah.
And I got into the military early in like, 18, 19. So I can go deploy overseas with a gun,
Hmm.
but I can't buy tobacco now if I was a military, and it just blows my mind. And I
Yeah,
think every person I knew besides myself and all my friends, they wound up like dipping tobacco and things like that all
right.
when they were 18, 19 in the military. And I'm not saying it's a good argument. I'm just saying it just some
Right.
things don't always add up here.
It's
But
just the irony, but I'll applaud you for the fact that you answered the tough question and you sidestepped the easy question, which was how many instructors do you have?
oh yeah, so yes, I'm sorry. I it's because I
No,
already had
that's
it in my
good,
mind.
man. Usually, they would just answer the easy question and move on. So,
No, I love expounding upon it. So, no, the big thing with that is I have right now, including myself, I have four instructors. We have another assistant, but we're growing. Actually, I'm probably going to be putting out an announcement here soon for another instructor.
that's awesome.
And we've, like I said, we've just been blessed. We really have. As a company, we've been blessed. We've been growing up. But I tried to balance it out. I winded up trying to cover all the time zones as much as possible. And then also, we have an instructor that does evenings and weekends. We have instructors that do, midday to later day. We have instructors that focus more on a Pacific time zone and things like that. So we
Hmm.
try to balance it all out.
Sure.
But they're all booked. They're
Yeah.
all booked. So it's a great problem to have, but we're ready to bring in some more.
Yeah, no, I'm really pleased to hear that number one, you're all booked. As a law-abiding taxpayer that supports law enforcement, that's great to hear. And that you have the good problem of we have to add more good instructors, so that's awesome. Frank, I could talk to you for another half an hour, but you have a business to run, instructors to find. So I'll ask you this question to kind of begin to close up. Yeah, I know it's always difficult when I ask it in this kind of vein with many of my guests, but is there maybe just one piece of advice, or maybe that first piece of advice, if somebody's out there, whether they're 25, 35, 45, and saying, you know what? I think I got a passion for this. I really want to get started. Is there a piece of advice, other than the obvious, which is talk to Frank Magaha? Is there a piece of advice that you would give those folks out there?
Yeah, prep before you even apply. I would When we first started, one of the biggest things we were getting from applicants was they wouldn't come to us until after they failed something, the poly, the psych.
Hmm.
If you go through, I'm not saying you got to be perfect, and I'm not saying you can't not get selected or even get DQ'd from a department and not get hired with them, but it's just adding another hurdle. And a lot of
Hmm.
times these DQs are for simple things, misarticulation. Just this week, I had to deal with 4 or 5 different individuals, both clients and non-clients, that admitted to crimes they've never committed. Our
Yeah,
fastest hire, we got her hired in 2 months. She almost admitted to multiple felonies and misdemeanors she never committed because she couldn't understand the legal language of, a 60-page background packet.
yeah.
So get everything that you're going to need. Start getting your references, start getting your driving records, start getting your background put together, start getting your resident history, all that. There's no harder hiring process, in my opinion, in the world. You're going to have to, some people say, oh, they only go back 5, 6, 7, 10 years. That's one aspect might do that, but then they can ask you anything they want. So,
Hmm.
if you fail a board interview, if you fail a polygraph, if you fail a background investigation, and then more importantly, the psychs are becoming the hardest thing to pass, and they're all the way at the end of the process, and you fail a psych, it's going to be another hurdle because you didn't prep. And that's why we focus so much on articulation, making sure you convey a message with what you intend so it can be received that way. And the only way to do that is to have all your information ahead of time and prep. And if you're already in the process, that's fine. Go back and get it. I don't care where you are in the process. But you say, oh, I got left as a psych, that's cute because
Hmm.
40% of applicants fail the psych.
Yeah.
That's what it is. Since COVID, that's what we're seeing. About 40% of applicants fail the psych. And I can almost guarantee when I talk with someone the first time, and I've said this to so many, and they say, hey, you're eligible. I'm concerned about your articulation. I'm concerned about your psych. Do you want to work with us or not? No, I'm going to go on my own. And then they call me back. Hey, I failed my psych. I don't even know if I want to tell you you're eligible anymore at this point
Right.
because you went in there and I told you you're coming across a little either egotistical or you're coming across with poor articulation. prep everything you can. It doesn't have to be with us. Prep with whoever you can find a mentor.
Right.
Prep as much as possible, because the things you can control, you need to control. You
Yep.
get one get out of jail free card. If I tell a background investigator, oh, sorry, that was a mistake, I didn't mean to check that. Okay. And then they ask me again, hey, what was the issue? Oh, that was a mistake. I didn't mean. Okay, no, get out of my office.
Yeah.
They're not. You don't. They got too many people to worry about. You got one background investigator reviewing 40 applicants. You got three others doing 40 applicants, all for 25 to 40 positions to fill an academy. They don't have time to. If you make a mistake, if you don't check your emails, pay attention, prep, be ready for what you're about to get into.
Yeah. I think that's awesome advice. You probably should have been around 30 some years ago when I was looking at fire departments, but then we probably wouldn't be here talking now. Frank, it was, and hopefully it will continue to be a great conversation. Really appreciate you being on. Before I let you go, tell our audience how best they can find you, find Armageddon Consulting, find the podcast out there. How best could they find all of that?
Yeah, my team has us all over the place from my knowledge, but so we have our website armageddonct.com. So that's just going to be armoganct.com. And on there we have a blog where you can chat with us. On there we also have access to our audio podcast. I think on YouTube and our social medias we're just under Armageddon Training. And then a lot of that stuff, almost everything coordinates and links to one. So if you get on
Mm-hmm.
our website, you'll find our YouTube video podcast. If you want our audio podcast, you can find it there, but it's also on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, I believe. So if we can be there, we're on there. I think we're on Instagram. I think we're on TikTok, and we just share clips and bits of knowledge the best we can.
That's awesome. Well, thank you again, Frank. I appreciate you taking time with me. I appreciate the great conversation. I had a lot of fun and really, really appreciate and applaud what you're doing out there. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Thanks again for having me on.
My pleasure. And thank you to all of you who have either watched or listened to this episode of Public Safety Talk Radio. And we'll be back with you next week with another great guest. Public Safety Talk Radio is produced by the POCUA. POCUA is a consortium of financial institutions serving law enforcement as well as other first responders and public safety professionals. To learn more about our association and to find one of our credit unions or service providers near you, go to www.policecreditunions.com. And always remember, if you aren't working with one of our POCUA credit unions, you're just banking with an institution that just so happens to serve first responders. As a public safety professional, you and your family deserve better. Find a POCUA credit union today.